Welcome to the inaugural lecture series of the Coalition of Community College Architecture Programs. I am Betsy Masters, and I am the Secretary of the CCCAP. And it is our great honor today to have as our guest, William Bates. Bill served as the 2019 president of AIA, American Institute of Architects, and he continues to be deeply involved in both the Institute and in the profession. He's going to tell us some of the things that he's done, but I'm going to just list this impressive list of things that he has been involved in. He's been a corporate architect in practice in global real estate and property management. He has practiced in many different ways. He has served as a partner in an architectural practice, as a design manager in a Fortune 500 corporation, as a regional bank vice president, as a high-tech startup executive, and as a hospitality chain executive. He currently teaches at Carnegie Mellon University. Bill is passionate about leveraging architecture to advance equity, diversity, and the environment. And I think we'll hear some of that in his talk today. Bill, we would like to welcome you today to speak to the CCCAP in our lecture series. There will be 4 lectures in this series. And so at that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Bill.
Well, thank you, Betsy. I really appreciate an opportunity to talk to your classes, and it's really a matter that I feel passionate about. I think architecture is such an important career and valuable, and has a huge amount of opportunity for people to contribute to society. And so what I have done, I've prepared a couple of slides that I'll walk through, and they cover some of the things I've learned through my time and practice, and share a little bit of what I think I can glean as being important. So let me pull up my slides, if you will, and I'll go to just a second here. Can you see my screen, Betsy?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I've called this presentation "Shared Spaces and Memorable Places," not just to have a rhyme, but to stress the value of architecture in identifying the spaces that we consider home, and connect people and connect communities. So and the memories that are made in those places. So as I start, the first slide is about some of the places and things that I remember of growing up. And it's a small town called Canonsburg that I grew up in. It was only about 11,000 people or so, but I benefited from a very engaged community. And when I say engaged, I mean that everyone looked after one another. It was fairly diverse. There were immigrants from all over the world in my community, and I had neighbors who were on one side who were from Poland, and on the other side who were from Italy, and then cousins, as you see here in the photo, who lived across the street or up, blocks away. But I grew up in a time when there was opportunity to just explore a town, and I was curious and creative at an early age. I loved to draw, and I love science, and had building blocks, and that's what brought me to architecture, right, eventually. But I was the first in my family to attend college. My my parents never graduated from high school, actually. They had to go to work as young kids, and so times changed, and I was able to take advantage of the opportunities that were offered to me. And coincidentally, I discovered architecture in a strange way. I was starting to apply to schools when I was in high school, and I had considered engineering as a field because I liked science. And I also love to draw, as I mentioned, and one of the interviewers that I met with for college asked me some questions about my interest, and at the end of the interview, I was surprised by a comment that he made. He said, "You know, I think you'll do great in college, but you don't strike me as an engineer." And I was sort of stunned, taken back by that. And he then went on to say, you know, just the fact that you keep talking about building things and sketching and even the way you dress makes me think that you might be happier in architecture. And so at that point I asked him, I said, well, how do you spell that? You know, sort of half jokingly, but I went home after that interview and ran to the library and looked up everything I could on architecture. And it intrigued me. I applied, switched my application from engineering to architecture. And when I got in, I loved it. It just, I felt guilty about getting grades for what I was doing. It was so much fun. And luckily I went to a school that had a Rome program. So I got to spend a year abroad and learned about architecture, but also about people and culture, and brought that back home. And it was amazing to be able to suddenly talk to my neighbors, my Italian neighbors, in their own language, and they loved it. They thought it was just amazing. And I can remember them getting on the phone and saying, "Oh, you got to come over and hear Bill talk. He's not only speaking Italian, but he's speaking it with a Roman accent." And they were from Naples. So this connection really made me feel closer to my community in a way that I hadn't before. And they felt closer to me. And in spite of the differences, the cultural differences that we each had. Growing up, my grandfather and my father both worked in the steel industry. You know, being from Pittsburgh, that's what you do. And as a matter of fact, I worked there during summers when I was in college. That's how I paid my tuition. But I found myself wrapped in architecture, and this is not a picture of me at that point, but this is the way I felt. I wanted to be an architect and embraced everything about the profession. And so I learned a lot about architecture in school, but also learned what hard work was, and how my father and grandfather had worked so hard to get me through school and provide those opportunities for me. And yeah, so I found that there were career opportunities once I got out of school. Was licensed shortly after college, and eventually I became a partner in a small firm, a 5-person firm, and practiced design of schools and churches and fire stations and the like. And then joined the American Institute of Architects, which I found enjoyable. It was nice to get to know other architects and learn what they were doing in their practices. And that eventually led to a phone call that I got one day from one of those AIA architects who said, we have an opening here at Westinghouse Electric for the corporate architect at our headquarters, and thought you might be interested in the position. So I joined that company, worked there for about 10 years, chasing projects all around the country and even in Canada. And I spent that time hiring other architects to design the projects that I was involved in, but I managed the design itself and then managed construction. From there, I went to a PNC Bank where I did similar things, but I was involved in strategic planning, working with the decision makers of the bank as to where they should put new headquarters or how large they should plan to build high-rise buildings in Pittsburgh or Philadelphia or Cincinnati, New Jersey. And then from there, the opportunities continued to come along in joining a high-tech startup that was called Force Systems. And that high-tech startup was based here in Pittsburgh. But shortly after I joined, I found that they were growing very quickly. And they asked me if I would help them with facilities elsewhere around the country. And then eventually facilities abroad in England and Ireland, France and Japan, Australia, Kuala Lumpur. So I had an opportunity to travel extensively with that job. And it was exciting, exhausting, but exciting. And eventually I ended up with an opportunity to join a restaurant chain called Eaton Park. And they had a hospitality group that I was involved in, and they did food service for the restaurants as well as the universities and corporations. And it was interesting because I began to see how the architecture of restaurants or cafeterias, in the case of schools or corporations, how they brought people together and helped exchange ideas and stimulate creativity within those communities or within businesses. Then later, I had the opportunity through the years and years of AIA activity to move on to the role of member of the board at the Pittsburgh chapter or at the state chapter, and then eventually president of the national organization. So yeah, it's been a fun run. I've learned a lot, have had a chance to do a lot of different things. This photo is from 2019 when I gave the commencement address at my alma mater at the University of Notre Dame, and had a chance to meet some very impressive people. So I really show this because it's about influence that we have, and it's not all just building things, but being able to make connections with people who have influence in other areas and show them what design thinking can mean for us. So getting to the heart of what I wanted to talk about today is the idea that there's a secret about design. And that secret is that great architecture is really rooted in the architect's ability to listen. And you think, well, wouldn't it be about designing and cool shapes and materials and constructability? It's that too, but listening is really important. We have to become empathetic listeners and understand our clients, what their needs are, their visions, what what they aspire to be, and then try to incorporate that in our designs. And with that in mind, I'm going to talk about two things that on the surface make no sense in the context of architecture, but I'll walk you through this and bear with me, try to make a point that that connects this with listening and understanding our clients and the users of our spaces. So yeah, there's an iceberg on the left and a quilt on the right. And these two things I find very meaningful in what we do as architects or even as designers of other types, whether it's interior designers or even as a contractor. And let's talk about how that is. Icebergs are often, it's like people. When we meet someone or bump into them, we see what is visible. But if you know anything about icebergs, there's about 70% of the iceberg that's beneath the surface of the water. And that's the part that we really need to understand if you want to navigate around the iceberg safely, or understand what it's about. So if you look at this picture, you understand that this on the surface, what we see immediately when we meet someone is obviously their gender, or most likely their gender, but their race, skin color, age. You might detect nationality from an accent or the language, their physical ability, or their ethnicity. But then when you get to the water level and start looking beneath the surface, start to see at first maybe wealth or social status, culture, religion, and then you look deeper and you see all of these other traits and interest and skills. And this is something that we often don't take time to understand about the individuals you work with. And in particular, our clients, we need to stop and take a look and get to know them. It's important that we understand what motivates them and how we can bring them together. And I think I like to think of this as melting the ice when you get to know what's beneath the surface, because you realize that you may have a lot in common with these people. And one of the things that I learned in being in the restaurant business was that people come in and sitting next to one another at a coffee counter or tables across one another, people often end up starting to talk and exchange thoughts or comments, even though they may be sitting next to a stranger. And the more they talk, oftentimes, the more they realize they have in common. So people gravitate to people they can relate to. And oftentimes that occurs, you discover these relatable similarities in restaurants or coffee shops, sports venues, schools, colleges, through sports and playgrounds and parks, concert venues, community centers. And so we need to think about these kinds of connections that we have with people, and everyone is looking for a way to have a meaningful life. And there was a psychologist named Maslow many years ago who developed this pyramid of hierarchical needs. And he said at the very bottom, the basic things that people need are shelter. It's physiological things. And then once that's established, then they can begin to explore things that provide safety, and then well-being, of belonging and love with friends, and then esteem, feeling confident in themselves, and feeling respect from others. And then this sort of creativity that sort of mushrooms at the very top of the pyramid. And everybody looks at these, and architecture has a lot to do with providing a safe place for these things to happen. So this is important as we look at society and what we do as designers, because everyone, no matter their religion, as you see on the left, these Buddhist monks enjoying the fun of a roller coaster. They're human just like anyone else, or people we might have in a sports team in common with, or some activity, some venue, or this concert or whatever, or music may be something that we share. And so one of the things that I always like to do is design in opportunities for people to interact in a way that they get to know each other in a different level, at below that water line, if you will. And the other element that I mentioned is the blanket or the quilt. And the image on the left is a quilt from a community in Alabama called Gee's Bend. And it's a African-American community that is known for making just beautiful quilts. And this is one of the quilts from that community. And really a great pattern. But the thing I want to bring out about its relationship to architecture is how similar it is to what we see on the right photo, the urban quilt. The urban quilt has different textures and colors, and there are neighborhoods, and I can almost picture the squares on this quilt as being blocks or neighborhoods, and the different colored stripes as being activities or demographics within a different section of community, and together it makes this urban pattern that is very vibrant, and people enjoy, and they engage in when it's working well. However, over centuries, these communities and our cities have evolved in ways in which some people are excluded, and some sections of a community are walled off, and become less inviting, and sometimes less safe. And so those qualities of that pyramid of Maslow's hierarchical needs are discounted in some communities more so than others. And so we have this inequality in communities. So one of the things I often refer to in my classes is the urban quilt and how we mend it. And this photo that I'm showing here shows the quilt in separate squares, and you see they're not mended together, and it doesn't serve the purpose of a quilt when it's fragmented like this. And oftentimes quilts, the urban quilt in particular, is broken up over time for lack of attention or sometimes intentional disenfranchisement. So consider architecture as the fabric that forms communities. And if you look at it that way, it provides a sense of identity, of place, and it preserves pride through memories, traditions, the place that you grow up in, you have a special connection to, and the people and the activities that you enjoyed as you grew up. And so it's a place where social interactions and understanding or developed. And one of my mentors, as I came along through architecture, is an architect called David Lewis. He's an immigrant from South Africa. He was ejected from South Africa for protesting apartheid back in the early 1950s, but ended up in Pittsburgh and starting a practice and teaching at Carnegie Mellon University and at Yale and other places. But one of the things that he taught me was that no building or neighborhood stands alone. Every building is connected to a street and connected to a community, a neighborhood, and that neighborhood is connected to the rest of the city. And if you pull a thread, it's all part of a fabric. If you pull one thread, the whole thing falls apart. So what we have to do is recognize where the quilt is falling apart. That urban fabric is tattered or shredded by policies or by neglect or deferred maintenance, absentee landlords. There are so many different things that affect it. As architects, we should keep our eyes open and identify these places and spaces and think about ways of solving them, solving the problems. And you can go anywhere in the world. This is an aerial photo of the slums of Mumbai in India. And you can see on the left, near the river, the slums. And the river is very polluted. And you can see the trash, the refuge that's thrown into the river and streaming down. And these little shanty houses that are just home built, handmade by the people who live there. And then you see this big barrier. It's a shred, it's a tear, it's a wall or a highway that's running along to build a border to keep that slum isolated. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see this lush community with condos. The quilt is rich with vegetation and courtyards and cars and it's very lush. So this is what inequity looks like, and so we need to think about how we serve society as we look at the built environment and being architects. I think this is important. We need to point these things out and look for solutions. The issues are prevalent everywhere. This is a snapshot I took last summer in Pittsburgh. You can see the difference between the neighborhood, which is a neighborhood called the Hill District, and the downtown area, which is just walking distance away. But the disparities between the two, there's signs saying no dumping and violators, should not trespass, and the highway work that sort of is symbolic of barriers being built to around these communities because they aren't being supported in the same way. A lot has been happening. The city has been doing quite a bit to try to improve conditions in this disenfranchised community, but there's still a lot of work to be done. So designers must look and listen empathetically before trying to lead. And we can lead in many ways beyond merely designing. We can lead by being active in the community and being a part of it to help the community understand what should be done in decision making. The role of the architect in helping society understand the value of good design is important. What is good design? And we have to educate our clients and our communities. When I was at AIA on the national board, we tried to do things like this by holding a Design for Justice Summit. And these are architects who attended that summit. And we talked about issues that are harming communities, things that have been institutionalized, like redlining over the years. And we are trying to empower architects all across the country to think about what they might do to change those situations in their communities. So we had a 2-day conference, a summit that looked at a lot of issues, and we debated them and made recommendations that then got passed on to AIA. And some of those recommendations were later shared with others that I met with, like the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And they were engaged in trying to solve problems, long-lived problems in their cities. And so we talked about what architects might be able to do, and they began to recognize the fact that architects could be valuable members and advisors on their city councils, on their planning commissions or other decision-making boards to help them improve their cities. Likewise, we supported a program called the Hip Hop Architecture Camp, which started by an architect in Wisconsin, and he is holding these summer camps for middle school kids all around the country. He travels around every summer and he holds these summer camps. His name is Michael Ford, and he was kind enough to put my picture on, or my name on a t-shirt that he gives the kids, along with other architects, so that they could see examples of people who, like them, start out in communities that may not have the exposure to quality architecture, but they could begin to learn about architecture and how it could improve the lives within their communities. And likewise, this is another example of an architect doing things beyond merely designing cool buildings. This is an architect named Chris Hildrey, who founded his own architectural firm, Hildrey Studio. And he was frustrated at the fact that he couldn't help all of the homeless people in his area. He's in London. And so he began to talk to the homeless people, like this woman in the lower right-hand corner. He's in the upper right-hand corner. And he began to realize one of the challenges they faced was the fact that when you're homeless, you don't have an address. And this is a problem here in the United States too. Without an address, you can't apply for a job. You can't open a bank account. There's just so many things. You can't get a cell phone. You can't. There's so many things you can't do. And so it sort of is a catch-22 that keeps you in a place of helplessness. So he came up with a clever idea, which I think is just brilliant. He put that fact together with what he knew were abandoned houses all around the city, and particularly in some disenfranchised communities. And these abandoned properties have addresses. They weren't in a condition to move these homeless people into, because they needed work. They were abandoned because they were run down. So, but he thought that, just the address could be helpful. So he worked with the city and got the rights to use those addresses temporarily. And he took a sample group that he started with of about 50 people, and he delegated addresses to each one of them. And surprisingly enough, within 6 months, almost every one of them, 95% of those homeless people had jobs. They had bank accounts. They were getting back into society, and the others were on their way. The remaining few who weren't fully employed were on their way to getting jobs. So just something as simple as that, and thinking through a situation, listening to the challenges people have, can make such a big difference. And so these are things that architects can do. Another group, this is another example from the UK, is a group of architects who got together and built this community center. They looked for something that people have in common. Looking at the iceberg, you don't think about this, when you look at differences between people, but everyone eats. And so they started this school of food, and they bring the youth in, the children in after school, and parents volunteer to teach them how to cook and where food comes from. So they have a garden in the back, and they show the children how to plant things, and they grow their own food and then cook it. So it really makes this powerful connection with place and memories and education, and it brings the parents together. They have adult cooking classes there, as well as the classes for the young people. But it's a place that people gather, and they have this community garden, as well as sharing dishes that might have cultural differences, and learning how to interact in a way that couldn't be done without the architecture. So anyway, we need design thinking for a healthier society. And the best architectural design stitches the neighborhoods together instead of walling them off. And then we need to seek opportunities to enhance societal well-being and offer solutions for sustainability and resilience. And that can be done as a citizen architect, not just sitting in front of a computer or CAD station and designing things, but using your creative juices to help solve problems of decision making, helping community make broader decisions about where a park goes, or who should be allowed to develop in a community. Should a strip shopping center or mall be built in the middle of a community? Is it the best thing that should be there, or will it bring people together? So these are the kinds of decisions that the mayors that we talk to wrestle with, and they feel as though architects have a power to drive change in so many ways and build influence. So we encourage architects all across the country and to collaborate in decision making, and at the same time you can do designing of buildings, but you can yes, spark ideas in communities. And this picture is a little hard to see, but these are all houses in a community in Mexico, and you can see it's only one tree out of all of these houses. It's so densely packed. And you wonder if this is sustainable. Is it healthy? Is it a good environment? Should there be more green? Is it resilient? So these are decisions that we as architects can influence. And I continue to do this even though I'm no longer president of the AIA. Few weeks ago, I was in Washington, D.C., and you see me here on the left with the current president of AIA and the CEO of the American Institute of Architects, as we were on our way into the offices of Housing and Urban Development Agency in Washington, D.C., to lobby that they allow architects more latitude in designing affordable housing. And then things like historic landmarks, preserving places so that we can preserve memories, because our memories are tied to the history of the places that maybe history before we even were born in a place. And oftentimes documenting those in murals so that it reflects the heritage and the culture of a community. One last example that I'll give is a fun and exciting project that I was involved in back in 1988. And it was shortly after the steel industry in Pittsburgh collapsed. You know, you've probably heard of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they're named that because it was the hub of steel manufacturing in the country. And at one point in the early 80s, the steel industry just pulled out. They closed all of the steel mills, which you see in the upper right-hand corner. They went dark, and they moved all the steel manufacturing offshore to other countries. And what we decided to do as architects, we decided to hold a conference and try to sort out what might be done with these vacant sites where steel mills had been shuttered, and how the communities could revitalize themselves. And so we held meetings with other designers and did brainstorming and organized something called the Regional Urban Design Assistance Team. Short name is RUDAT. And it's a process in which we listen to communities and their concerns, and then try to solve problems as professionals. And we bring a team of experts together. They're not all architects. They may be economists or landscape architects or urban planners or contractors. And anyway, we did that looking not just at the problems that Pittsburgh was having with its collapse of an industry, but we decided to be inclusive and invite any industrial city to join the conversation. And that drew enough attention that we were able to bring a keynote speaker in the honorary chair of the conference. The keynote was at the time Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, who's now King Charles of England. But we held meetings, and he brought many of the people from architects from England, Germany, and people from Mexico and other countries, Japan, who came and shared their concerns because there were a lot of other cities that were suffering. They were starting to see the decline of these long-term industries that had supported them. we held meetings, we listened to the community groups, we had speakers who came in and helped us with recommendations, but we also listened to the communities, people who had worked in those steel mills and in related businesses, and we heard what they had to say, how their lives had been affected by the collapse of that industry, and we made some recommendations that were implemented. And it changed the city from what you see on the left, where the rivers were lined with industry because the industry needed the water from the rivers to draw cooling water for the blast furnaces and to float the coal barges up that filled the furnaces with fire, and it filled our air with smoke. And as a result, we were able to get the city to step back and look at new industries, like the high-tech firm that I eventually ended up working for, and looking at the rivers in a different way, and thinking about the rivers as being recreational sources that you could water ski on or jet ski, and which you'd never have done in the setting on the left because the rivers were so polluted. So we were able to change the city, and it eventually was listed as one of the most livable cities in the country. So I close with this quote: "The value of a designer's work is only limited by who the designer values." And I hope you'll think about that when you look at your next project or future projects, and think about that with your career. I hope you'll look at all the possibilities that architecture presents for you and for society. So thanks for allowing me to share some of my thoughts with you. I hope that you'll find it meaningful. And I will stop sharing and return to you, Betsy.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much, Bill. And I'm sure that everybody listening to this realizes why it is that you were president of AIA National, because you were so good at articulating the value of design and the value of architects as well. And, this highlighting this superpower that we have, to use a term that Mike Davis used in another lecture, yeah. Highlighting this superpower to envision possibilities is something that is, particular skill that architects have that others do not have. And you did a great job pointing out how architects don't just design buildings, and we need to educate mayors and other elected officials as to the value that architects can bring to the dialogue. And excuse me, in some of the conferences that one might set up, showing the mayors, what some of the solutions might be to some of the problems that they have, is a really important step in the process of healing a community. And, just so you know, sometimes architectural contracts might even come out of those kinds of processes. So, we're not we're not completely uninterested in that, but we're not trying to necessarily, stack the deck for architects. So also, the term design thinking, I think it's so important to use that and to highlight that. It's a term that architects have always done design thinking, but it's very trendy the last couple of years. So, but we're the real design thinkers.
Yeah.
So I think we can
right.
claim that.
That's our secret.
And just one question though, when you talked about the Hill District in Pittsburgh, can you remember some of the specific things that the city did to improve the situation?
Yeah, there are things that you can drive around and see. There's a brand new library, a community library that sort of brings people together and offers opportunity for them to gather in, because it's got a meeting space as well. And then likewise, it's a community that has struggled to maintain businesses that are so important to the health of the community. One of those businesses that has been missing for a long time is a grocery store. So
Yes.
people from that community live in what you'd call a food desert in many respects. So there's been this big push to sort of establish a grocery store in the community. And that's getting some traction now. Likewise, identifying some of the places that provide memories in the community. They had fallen apart, but there were some really important places that had early sports events. There were Negro baseball teams that were established in that community. And some of those places have been plowed under, and also a playwright like August Wilson, who you may have heard of, and he's one of the great American playwrights, grew up there. And just this year, his old home has been restored and opened as a museum. So that helps preserve memories. And when you see so many houses that have been erased or plowed under because they've just fallen into disrepair, you start to feel that the neighborhood has been erased in itself, and the memories of growing up there and the people who grew up there have been forgotten or pushed aside. So things like that, those sorts of elements are really critical to maintaining the health and well-being of a community. And so the city's starting to see that kind of revitalization and rebuilding in the community. So yeah, it's encouraging.
Well, that's great. And thank you so much for doing this for the CCCAP. I think there were a number of examples of conferences that you mentioned that are events that might take place in the building that we're designing for this competition. So it's very, very apt. And so I just want to remind the other students that there are 3 other lectures in this series. And with that, I'm going to just say thank you again, Bill, and say goodbye.
All right. Well, goodbye. It's been a pleasure, Betsy, and I hope your students enjoy their project. It sounds like an exciting one.